Today, I want to talk about professional branding, what it is and what it isn't. So we have three parts to this. I'm going to talk first about what it isn't. Then I'm going to talk about what professional branding is. And as always, I try to leave you with what does this mean for you? What can or should you be doing? So we'll get started. All right. I tried to find a picture that could evoke what I see happening on LinkedIn and why I make a distinction about personal and professional branding. It's not clear, but there has been a movement among a lot of more solopreneurs to begin to think about themselves as what they're saying, an authentic person. And that means they do personal branding. And I don't argue with that at all. That's their choice. I'm not debating it in terms of what we're seeing on LinkedIn, where there's a big group of people right now complaining, and they're big LinkedIn experts who are worried about what they call the Facebook happening to LinkedIn. That's not what I'm going to address. But what I want to talk about is why I make a distinction for us in the global world about professional branding. This is from, as I do what I've now taken to call my GLIT review, my Google Lit review, going out on the interwebs, because that's where the state of the art's being written on all the kinds of professional development topics these days. And this is from an article from CEO World. When I looked at them and searched on them, this is one of the few articles that actually distinguishes the two. This was from a few years ago. You'll see them in the reference list, so you can check them when I send out the PowerPoint link. This person who wrote the article has focused on personal branding as what I think of more professional branding, what you bring no matter what kind of job you're doing. And they seem to imply in the professional brand is that the individual's tied into who they do it for, meaning the organization, or maybe they mean themselves. I'm not here to debate this either. What I'm here to tell you is, even the people who say they're right about they are writing about professional branding, end up referring to personal branding as well. This is from a web page. When I looked up what is professional branding, this was the beginning of the article in the purple. And at the bottom, I had to leave it a little bit small so you could see what I highlighted is they actually refer you, as you're doing a strengths inventory, to a personal brand workbook from PricewaterhouseCoopers. I think this is from Asha, a careers place we've used before for literature, but a few years ago. So there are people who will distinguish between it. Occasionally with people on LinkedIn, the personal branding experts, I brought up my personal professional perspective that it's really professional branding for the global world. And they focus internationally, they say, but it's still, I would say, more, at least a US audience, but definitely a Western, more focused on the American version of LinkedIn, I guess I would say. So what is it really? This from another group describes it as a brief statement with your unique strengths, what makes you differ. I would not say it's a brief statement. For me, it's the whole way that you live and work in your professional lives. But they go on to talk about what it is you are in your public presence. And that brings me to what I'd like to talk to you about in terms of how I think about and define and have worked with many of you on ways that you can build your professional brand by building your professional presence and then use it. I'd like you to keep the phrase personal professional perspective in mind. And I use this because each of us is a professional, but my perspective on what I've done
oppressed right now,
and the way of what I've done and the way that I try to work with you all is that you have a unique professional perspective that you bring For example, if you worked many years since the beginning of the HIV epidemic, you would be well able to comment on that, but that would still be your personal professional perspective, not necessarily what reflects everybody. So many of you have been through aspects or all of the course that I have online called Building and Updating Your Professional Presence. And just as a reminder, when you build and update this, it has 4 steps, which help you really dig into uncover your uniqueness. I do it in a different way from taking a strengths inventory. I work with you to build your evidence base. After that, you have your virtual visibility and your in-person visibility, and that's how you use and apply and are seen in your professional presence. And these are all things that are what you control, what you own. So your side of the conversation, what you put out there. The next part of your personal brand is what I call reflected visibility. And for me, this is how people see you. So what we know about each other on this call every week, for those who've been here, all of you have been here more than once, I think, but also for what people see from your virtual visibility. If you comment on LinkedIn, in-person networking, if you go to meetings, if you've been asked to give a talk or a lecture at a school, a graduate school, whatever it is. And finally, the last building block is your reputation. And reputation is more than just your reflected visibility of direct, where people see you directly. That is, how are you known? How do people talk about you? People who know you, who you haven't seen in a while, maybe they still know about you, who knows? But these are the components that I look at as building all, sorry that I keep hitting the mic, all of your professional brand. So let's talk about what this means for you. I always tell you that you are the one in charge of your professional development. And I say this to every person I talk to before I start to work with you. I remind you, I will give you advice. And on these calls, Ron and I both give you advice. You ultimately have to decide what out of the advice you're going to take forward and what won't work for you in your situation. But the strong base that you build and update and keep updated helps you use your professional presence, both virtually and in person. So let's think about those as 2 things, asynchronous and synchronous. We're using that a lot these days once we became more aware of, in the COVID divide, you couldn't necessarily be in the same room as someone else unless you were on video. It's pretty clear in person when you do networking, meet someone at a meeting, work with them on a project. In your synchronous world, how and in what way you use your expertise in your professional presence. But this just happened yesterday. I had been looking at places I had commented last week to try to give you an example, and this actually worked out perfectly. When you're in the virtual world, how do you come across? What are you able to put out as your personal professional perspective? Posts, comments, articles, Twitter, things people read from conference abstracts, even journal articles and documents that you've written. Andy Foote is a big LinkedIn expert and is recognized as such. And he posted yesterday about basically the Facebooking stuff that's coming on LinkedIn. And there was apparently a press release on this because he talked about, he's quoting from this article in the New York Times that the company's trying to encourage engagement while protecting the professional context. And Andy was saying, no, LinkedIn is not doing that. And in fact, in this press release, Andy had highlighted the blue. But what I saw out of this that Andy made a point out of it is Mr. Roth, Dan Roth works at LinkedIn, said they're encouraging influencers to join the site in the hope that they will post about topics like leadership. Let me just digress from my formal speech and say, influencers posting about leadership. Not a lot of people who are influencers and don't get paid to do stuff and aren't being paid to do stuff are going to post about it. But that's just how I see it. So what I decided that I was going to reflect back, and I often try to, is I try to give the global perspective, what I hear from you all. And in the course, in fact, this came up last week. Ron and I were in one of the first review meetings with our new cohorts. And one of them said, Sue, I need to put things a certain way in the biopara because in my country, in my region, they expect to see that. A couple of days later, someone said, I'm expected to be very formal in my office. I cannot be like this. We were talking about ways that they could demonstrate the work that they've done and take credit for it in your intellectual property. So I wrote this not whether I was agreeing or not agreeing with the influencers coming, which I would have liked to write about. But instead, I talked about the fact that there are the younger generations. There was one comment from someone who said the Gen X and millennials are not on here. And I said, yes, they are. And there are a lot of global professionals who are participating more in the LinkedIn, at least the LinkedIn American version that I get, plus their feeds. They want to be a global professional. They want to be seen. And they don't need the things that they're already using in their personal lives. They tell me that. They don't need another WhatsApp group. They don't need to be in a Facebook group. They're coming here for people that can help them and in their professional goals, but also that they can give back. So they're looking for more virtual visibility. This was not a long presentation. We have a few references, but I wanted to stop here. And I made it short deliberately because I want to hear from Ron and all of you about your thoughts on this. I could have gotten this wrong. I'm happy to be told that there's other views for it, but you all have been, many of us, you have been with us from the beginning, from March of 2021. And I'm curious what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and what your thoughts are on professional branding or any other part of this topic that I raised. So, Ron.
Yeah, just to let everyone know, Sue and I talked about this a little bit last week. I like the way this presentation comes out. And while you were talking about reputation, it reminded me that when you and I are working with individuals to help them explain their accomplishments and the like, often it's going to the reputation component where you get the proofs. So what did somebody say? How do you know it was important? They told me this, they invited me to do that, etc. These are all elements of reputation, which are so important. And in fact, this is where I discovered, in fact, how important this was. It was working with my own son's resume, where I said, how do you know? And then he basically said, listen, they keep asking me to do this, and they keep inviting me to do that. It's not part of my job, but this is what I do. They keep coming to me. So that told me, and that's reinforced for me, and it's been proving true all along. So that's how I see it. And one of the big challenges, I think, in this whole area has to do with what people do outside of their profession that interferes with their professional brand. And we see this with politicians who mess up because they posted something on Twitter 5 years before they consider getting into politics, and those components which they thought were personal start to become part of or have become part of the reputation because somebody picked it up and somebody said this. So this is where I think part of the challenge is your personal brand. In other words, how you behave in what you think is a very personal area can interfere or cause problems. And it can be even more important like that for certain types of occupations, like doctors as professions, military people as professions, police as professions, etc., where their public presence out of uniform or out of their jobs sometimes can actually cause them problems while they're doing their jobs. And doctors in particular can find themselves that way. And I presume nurses might find this as well. Just some thoughts related to what you said there.
Yeah, and I just want to expand on that personal aspect, because the other side of it is, as we encourage you to bring in the personal efforts you've made, volunteering as a social media coordinator, helping tutor people, whatever are the myriad ranges of experience that you get that isn't just professional by someone's, I would say, old-fashioned definition. Let me open up the floor. Anybody want to say anything? Questions, comments? Really? I've got a silent group today. I know it's the end of the workday for some of you. For Charlie out in Egypt, it's late for sure, but I'm glad that you all can come along. Let me ask you a question at least. You can stick your answer in the chat box if you don't want to unmute. Have you ever consciously thought about, this is my professional brand, or what I'm doing is helping my professional branding? Just a yes or no.
I can, if I can share a little bit about
Sure.
this one.
Yeah.
Sorry for not opening my camera. It's 10 p.m. here. And
No, don't worry. Oh, Angela, of course, it's late
no, but
late for
I'm not
you.
very professional, so I need to take care of my branding. I'm kidding. But on LinkedIn, I've had times where I wanted to post something, for example, a social gathering with survivors or something that is not work related, and then I thought, okay, but who is going to benefit from that, or to whom am I serving with that? So with social media, I always think if I can be of use or of benefit to someone else, and then if not, I try to keep it to myself or like to my closer network, my friends, my family, through WhatsApp. So this is the way I have chosen, but I really don't mind when people share on LinkedIn something happy, for example, something related to their children, because there's always something to learn from that as well, about leadership and how to manage work-life balance. So I don't have a problem with that.
But that exactly what you said is the difference between the posts that Andy Foote and Brenda Meller write. Brenda posted the other day about her dog, taking her dog to the dog bakery, and she didn't just put a picture of that. What she talked about is exactly what you said, Angela, relating it to some aspect of professional development, of what she learned along the way. And so I think you make a good point. I have seen you post, though, for example, about the events that you have for the survivors and all the work that you do on that. And you have a very good way about using the picture after the fact to explain about what's going on, or in the middle of a multi-day workshop, and you usually have, I call it a lesson, some reflection to add to it. And that's what I call your personal professional perspective.
Yeah.
So that's how I view you. Stephanie, I'm going to put you on the spot, and if you don't want to, you don't have to answer, but do you want to talk about personal branding, professional branding that you and I did years ago?
I think that just in public health, because we're not in marketing, that it's the whole concept it was definitely new for me. But it's definitely something that I've had to work on and develop, because we are in a day and age that how you are quote branded is important. What is it that you want your professional reputation to be, for you to be known in, etc. For me, it was actually getting started in that, because it's just not anything that we learned in school at all.
Yeah. First
Time around, or the second time, that I went back to Tulane. So for me, that has been the challenge, because it's just not been a focus, but yet it's very important. And I've appreciated you working with us on it.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's great. Ron, yeah, I was going to call on you next.
Yeah, just actually what Stephanie said there, I think is really important. This whole idea, and you and I have talked on the courses that we're doing about how nobody really learns this stuff. If you're in marketing, maybe you do, but most of the professionals that we work with, lawyers, doctors, nurses, public health care, et cetera, public health professionals, and so on, this just isn't taught. And the whole idea of creating a presence isn't taught. And to the point where when I was director of curriculum for the community college, my son was actually there, and he came home and I was reviewing his resume. And I said, "Who gave you this?" And he said, he told me about it. And he said, "It comes from the the community college website and so on and so forth. I said, oh my goodness, are we teaching that? I was responsible for the curriculum and he was showing me the curriculum I was responsible for. I'll tell you, it was shocking. And just how poor it was. And not that we went back and fixed it necessarily, but it was the sort of this beginning. And so, yes, this is tough. Not only that, but also there's a lot of controversy out there in terms of which the best practice and so on. And it's subtle stuff. Like some people think that your branding is all about using color choices and so on, which is really that kind of marketing consistency and so on and so forth. And that's true. That is about branding. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about really is you as you are seen by others, and ultimately how you would like to be seen by them and how you hope they talk about you ultimately, so that your profession, you and your profession continue to grow and you continue to offer something that's desirable to a potential employer.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions? I know each of you, and I can think of for each of you one aspect of either something that we've worked on together and or your LinkedIn profile or something you've done where you've all been able to use your personal professional perspective and put it out there in podcasts on LinkedIn, even LinkedIn banners, the photo banner behind your head, the way in which you've worked with various groups, and you talk about that in the work that we've done on your CVs. So I see each of you as already working on and taking control of your professional branding. But I've always been curious about whether you all feel differently from me, and that's fine too. I will not make anything out of your silence other than we often get our 4 o'clock attendees. It's the end of the day. For some people, it's late at night for a couple people. But I appreciate being able to present things here that every time I think that maybe I won't do this so frequently. I was telling myself this morning, I love once a week. This is like my professional development stuff where I go look it up in my Google Lit review. Yes, Ron, before we get
Jessica has her hand up.
Oh, she does. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jessica.
It's okay. Hi, thank you. Nice to meet you, Ron, and good to see you again, Sue.
Yeah, welcome. I'm glad you could make it today. I know you've tried before.
Yes, and I've definitely been, after working together, been more conscious of sort of my personal or professional brand. And I think in the past, I've been hesitant to post as much on LinkedIn because of that blurred line and just feeling more confident about it. But one question I had, how do you approach expanding your personal brand so that you're not pigeonholed? Because again, sometimes you gain a reputation and because you're good at something, but it might not be an area where you feel like, or a skill where you feel very fulfilled by. So I guess just wanted to hear your thoughts about that. Is there a way to reasonably and I guess convincingly expand your personal brand without going too far right out on a limb in order to attract more attention for an area you might want to focus on in the future?
It's a good question. And I'm actually working with someone right now who's been for several years in a niche area of public health. And it's an important area. And she wants to go on with it, but not necessarily be doing that for the rest of her career. And the way that you do this is to start broadening the way you have interactions. She's still working in that area. She's consulting, so she's still writing and known for it. But I said to her, think about the things that make the work you do strong. If you're in alliances around the global health topic, and this goes across, and I'm using public health examples because a lot of us on here are in public health directly or indirectly, but it goes across to all sorts of professions. And Ron and I right now have a couple lawyers. We have 3 architects. We have someone who's a space, he calls himself a space enthusiast. I've really been interested that Ron and I have been able to help all of them identify what they take forward. Jessica, I'm not going to use your specifics, but I'm just going to talk generally to you about the way you could do it. as you move beyond an area you've been working in and the way in which you have made that helped because of your professional branding, help bring it and your expertise, bring it to a new point, you start to talk about the underlying things that you brought to that helped you highlight this success as it's going forward. So things that you can bring would be your critical thinking and your skills in identifying what works and what doesn't, both data-based as well as the storytelling. Say, for example, there was an innovative way for project scale up to happen. As far as I know, they haven't found the magic in that, and we've all been doing it for many decades. But some new innovation, you would talk about the things that you've led before and the characteristics that are common between that work you did before and what a new area will be. Now, it's hard not to be pigeonholed because people are going to see you in what your resume is or your full CV, and even your bio pair will talk about like where you've been. But you start by always talking about yourself in that newer version. Instead of I am a program manager for Project Scale Up, you talk about I have been at the leading edge of finding ways to increase efficiencies and save money as we scale out a cold chain for vaccines. I don't know, whatever. So that you start to give people a vision of where you're going. So your first line in a bio para might be, Jessica Rodriguez is an innovator taking project management to a new level by doing blah, blah, blah. Evidence-based, of course, not self-value judgment words. And that's how you begin to keep yourself from being stuck in a niche and at least helping people see where you're aiming at. Let me stop there because I know it's very vague right now, but is that helping you understand? And then I want to talk about how you can use LinkedIn to your advantage.
Yeah, that's helpful in terms of starting with where I'm headed versus where I've been. I think that's very helpful. And then the commonalities or common threads that would be applicable to any kind of niche within the niche that I'm actually aiming for. So yes, that's helpful.
All right, I'm going to ask Ron for comments and then I'll talk about LinkedIn.
Yeah, because while you were talking, Jessica, it reminded me, and Sue as well, it reminded me that you can find yourself doing really well in a particular area at your current place of work. And so the next thing you're doing it more and more, but it's not what really drives you. It's not what you really want to be doing. And it's not what you thought you were hired for. It was a niche inside of it. So I can see that becoming a challenge because you do it so well. So you find yourself being channeled down that way, which can interfere with your ultimate goal. And that's what I was hearing. I guess the question I have is that where you are now, are you being channeled? And secondly is, okay, so now I'm trying to broaden my career in my next position because I'm now starting to look. So there's a slightly different view on that. So if you're being channeled where you are and you would like to modify that, that's one thing. But if you're feel like you've been pigeonholed and you want to expand into a new direction as you move your career forwards, that's a slightly different question. And I think there's slightly different answers for how you deal with that. So is yours more about future prospects and
yes, exactly. It's the latter. Mm-hmm.
What you can do in virtual visibility, and one of the silver linings of COVID, because there's so many more people on LinkedIn, but it's still a rare thing to use LinkedIn for many people. So you get visibility is you start to look at the area you want to be in or the aspects of what you want to take forward. Easiest thing to do to reinforce professional branding is for you to find articles, scientific journals, reports from donors or foundations, articles in the gray literature, or even articles like I find on mostly around professional development on various career websites. Put the article up with a post, and a very short post, but at least a couple lines talking about what was the importance for you, what was the overall message you took home from the article, and how to take it forward. For example, there was a lot of posting around a couple weeks ago there was a big anniversary of the HIV World PEPFAR, and there's a big talk that Biden's giving and hosting, having that stuff done here. So you might, if you're in HIV and you want to broaden that now to something else, you might talk about an article that is doing a retrospective of HIV and then say, and the talents that were required to do that, blah, 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 all of these things from behavior change to getting AZT and other antiretrovirals out. Now, as I've been turning to some new thing, then you talk about, and in that area, this requires countries to have standards on how they're going to deliver it. The supply chain, it looks like we're going to use less of that medicine, but actually now you have to do more education for providers or something like that. So you can talk about that as a jumping off point for things that are important for you in what you have done in your work already. You're not writing a scientific article with citations, but you are giving something that people will recognize as, oh, Jessica knows what she's talking about. Now look what she's applying it to. Does that help you think about posting on LinkedIn?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
And you can always check in with me if you really get the willies about what you're writing. I'm happy to review it quickly. Thank you, Angela. That's great to know. It's helpful.